when the Montana GOP had their statewide convention in Helena. I remember getting a bunch of phone calls from a lot of you who were there, and you said, hey, you got to see the presentation that this guy gave at the GOP convention. Marc Malone, the president and founder of America21, now with us here on Montana Talks. Marc, great to have you on the show this morning.
Thanks, Aaron. Great to be on.
Yeah, well, first off, I mean, I could kind of give the introduction for America21 and what your organization is all about based off of your website, et cetera. But why don't you tell us what your organization is all about in your own words?
Sure. Yeah, so America21 is an anti-globalist organization. We seek to undo the legislation primarily in Middle America, which basically pushes this Great Reset legislation. So we can discuss how that would be, but essentially it comes in the form of sustainable development under the guise of climate change. So we started to see an issue quite some time ago, and President Trump brought this up a lot, which is this idea that climate change is being used as somewhat of a scam to push forth, high taxation and, of course, centralized government control. So what a lot of people don't understand is most of that legislation is actually at the local level and not in D.C. So our job in the organization, we have political contacts, of course, in places like Montana where we did the GOP presentation. Our job is to undo that legislation before it comes fully to fruition. And, of course, it becomes too late to undo it later.
Yeah, so I see from your America21 website, you're an English-born American philosopher. Talk about, I guess, why this issue is something that's so near and dear to your heart in particular, especially not being, born and raised in Middle America.
Right, yeah. So my wife's from Minnesota originally. It's actually where I am right now. I moved over here a few years ago, and I've always loved America, and America is my nation now. And I've always loved the ideals. Of course, if we could have a world run by American principles, sovereignty of the individual, freedom, and of course God above all, we would have a better world that way. The issue that we have, and the issue that I saw when I came here, is while things were better initially, we've had the last 18 months, and then we've seen the entire globe turning into one giant project, almost where there's very little separation now between nations. Why I care about America is, other than the fact that I love the country and primarily being a nation under God, if we lose America, we lose the West, and if we lose the West, we lose the world. So this job, this fight that we're engaged in, of course, is for America first, but it's also for everybody else.
We hear a lot of terminology thrown out to describe what's taking place in America right now, what's taking place in the world right now. Mark Levin has a book out talking about American Marxists. People will throw out the terms of socialists or communists or Marxists or globalists. I've given my definition of the Great Reset. How do you define the Great Reset and what that means for those of us here in Montana?
Right, yeah. So the Great Reset is essentially a think tank idea which comes out of the World Economic Forum and, of course, their founder and President Klaus Schwab. But really you can trace its roots back much, much further to at least a century ago in an idea called technocracy. So it isn't actually socialism or Marxism in the way that we see it today. Technocracy is a means of governance which essentially centralizes science, medicine, the economics, and the politics of systems. The difference between technocracy and socialism is technocracy doesn't have to be government in the sense that it is governance. So we've seen, of course, the entire world be shut down by the World Health Organization. Well, they're not an elected body, they're not a government, they're not a Stalinist organization in the sense that they seized power by force, yet they do have global power. So what technocracy is essentially centralizing those systems into one system, and it doesn't have to be an elected system, nor a government legislative system. So what the Great Reset really is technocracy. It is this system, this means of governance. But it is just an idea, really. The political foundation of the Great Reset is actually called Agenda 21, which was launched in 1992 and signed by 179 nations, including this one, to essentially, as they put in their own document, this was a UN document, to centralize land, water, and air on the planet to save the world from climate change. And you think, okay, land, water, and air, that's probably not a big deal. Who doesn't want to protect land, water, and air, right? This is our land. Of course we want to protect it. But then, of course, once you take pause and you think about that, you go, okay, land, water, and air. What isn't land, water, and air? I mean, isn't our property on land? Don't we drive cars? Don't we own businesses on land? Don't we raise cattle on the land? Don't we get food from the ocean? Don't we travel in the sky? Suddenly you start to realize land, water, and air is the centralization of resources on the entire planet. So this document is an official treaty signed by George H.W. Bush. And of course, we saw when President Trump came in, there was some moves to kind of peel back some of this, which is partly why even within the party there was a lot of pushback against Trump. But as I said at the beginning, this Great Reset agenda really is localized. This is the genius part of this agenda.
What is it that makes this a local political fight? Is it zoning challenges? Is it high taxation that forces people off the land? What is it particular that makes this a local fight?
Yeah, it's actually both of those. So this agenda has basically been localized. So rather than it being sort of UN top-down or DC top-down, it's actually implemented in the county via what's called corporate stakeholders. You have a bunch of corporations locally with the county council and a bunch of NGOs. They implement this law. So it's never called Agenda 21 or Agenda 2030. It's called Missoula 2030. It's called Bay Area 2030. So you don't actually know what you're looking for half the time because it is implemented locally under the town name. All you need to do is look for 2030 and you'll start to find it. The easiest thing for us to do from a political perspective is firstly to obviously vote in people that are America first and that are obviously anti-globalist just by their basic manifesto. The zoning is a huge issue because by getting people off the rural land, of course, their excuse is that it's better for the climate, right? If we can put people in congested cities, we'll pollute less, we'll use less, and therefore it'll be better for the earth. But from my perspective, that just sounds like a good excuse for, of course, easier control. So one of the ways that they do that, of course, is with zoning. They make it very, very difficult for independent business, but make it very, very easy for big business. And we've never seen that more evident than the last year and a half, right? The fact that certain corporations could stay open and independent businesses must be shut down, and now 40% of independent businesses that shut down never reopened. So we're already seeing the beginnings of this process happening. But as it will move forward, it will switch back into the climate. So, yeah, zoning's a huge one. Ultimately, they won't be trying to get people off the land by force. They'll be doing this economically. So you may find 5 years from now, you go down to your local gas station, you put in your zip code, when you put in your bank card, and it turns out that you can't get gas because you're not in the right location. Or perhaps that eventually they stop running water and electricity to the town because you're not complying with climate rules. This might sound alarmist, but I'm not sure it needs to be over the last year and a half. After all, lockdowns did put 1.5 billion people into poverty around the world, not to mention, not getting cancer screenings, not to mention the fact that I think the BBC reported 250 million people put into famine. So we're already at the beginning of this process. So I don't want to sound alarmist. The alarm's already going. But there's still a lot of time, and there's still a lot we can do. And Montana is a great example of a state, and to be honest, a part of the entire world that has been naturally very resistant to this. So the next step is to be more aware of it and to begin to gut out this 2030 legislation that is implemented in the local county.
Yeah, and I think, because we've got listeners, like I'll get emails every day from Harry and Laurel talking about Agenda 21, and, hey, call that Agenda 21, call this Agenda 21. And it's like, look, at the end of the day, you can call it Agenda 21 all day long you want, but people were tuning it out. And so, but what the lockdowns have done and what the shutdowns did and their overreaction to COVID-19, Justin Trudeau, the liberal Canadian Prime Minister, he talked about leveraging COVID-19 to usher in the Great Reset. And I think for Montanans now they're awakened to this. They're more awakened to this than ever before about the fact that, just like what you said, they used COVID-19 to shut down mom and pop small businesses here in the state. At the same time, they allowed these woke corporations to stay open and pack people into their box stores, but you couldn't have your little yarn shop open for a couple of customers at a time. I mean, it was so absurd. And the county health officers who would lecture you all day long about mask mandates and social distancing until the Black Lives Matter riots and protests started, and then they were the greatest social distancers of all. And so I think it's more blatantly obvious to everybody now exactly what the agenda really is here.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And we probably worth pointing out that all of the same people who are pushing the climate agenda are the same ones pushing the COVID-19 agenda, right? Whether it is Klaus Schwab, whether it's Bill Gates, it's all the same key players. And, you pointed out about how the local shop couldn't stay open, but of course the big work corporations could. And that's why it's technocracy as opposed to Marxism, where you have a corporate oligarchy who gets control of resources as opposed to the state. But it's one entity in technocracy, really. So they're pro-capitalism for them, just not for us.
Yeah, as long as they can control the levers of power. I mean, it's kind of like China. In a way, China has become more of a market economy, but you can't really call it a free market economy because they just want the ability to control and have leverage over those companies and over the market. Well, we do have a caller on the line. In fact, I mentioned the Big Sky Worldview Forum, and I don't know if Marc will be speaking as part of that or if he's coming for another GOP event. But either way, Dick Pence from the Big Sky Worldview Forum. Now on the phone lines with us here. Hey, Dick, great to hear from you. Did you have a quick question or comment?
Good morning, Aaron, and good morning, Marc, as well. Yes, first of all, I wanted to clarify that this came to my attention through Tim Stark, the Central Committee in Yellowstone. And so we will be working with a couple of Central Committees, and we have an event scheduled for February 18th at the Bighorn. We're putting that together now. And why? Because this thing, you can hardly exaggerate how big this is. Marc is right. This is anti-American and particularly anti-Christian. We've followed this for a decade. So I just wanted to make sure that people understood this wasn't just the Big Sky Worldview Forum. It actually came from some Republican Central Committees that we're working with, particular Tim Stark, and thank you for taking my phone call.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dick Pence with the Big Sky Worldview Forum. Always a pleasure, yeah. But and then your call also underscored the importance of this conversation and the importance of this conversation continuing. So thanks for calling in. Marc Malone, America21, yeah, that's great to hear. You will be back in Montana in February. We see it here in Montana in terms of this great reset and how they will use the left will use every single tool in their toolbox and that's how we need to look at a lot of these debates. We need to look at critical race theory as another tool in their toolbox. Yellowstone wolves in Yellowstone are another tool in their toolbox. They're freaking out that 3 wolves were killed in the first week of the hunting season for wolves here in Montana. Well, we've got an overpopulation of wolves. There's over 1,100, the last count that I heard, which is far greater than the targets for recovering that particular species. But see, it's not about the wolves. It's not about the environment. It's not about wildlife ecology. It's about using things like wolves as tools to harm our agricultural base of our economy and our rural way of life. Anyway, kind of your thoughts on at least my perspective there.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely correct. Because of course, the way that we live rurally, and I currently live in Arizona rurally too, and there's a lot of wildlife there. And of course, if you want to, social engineer, which is essentially what technocracy is, the science of social engineering is the definition. And you mentioned China. China is already a technocracy. Again, as you pointed out, right, large corporate oligarchs, but centrally controlled state. So what they really want is a global China, and in some ways, even a global EU. So in this instance, it's about reliance. If you want to control a population, you want them reliant on you and not the earth, right? So if we can go out and hunt, and we have real sustainable communities where we, look after one another, we have freedom. Well, it becomes really hard to control people. So if you can start constricting the freedom on how people can hunt, how people can live, where people can travel, which of course we've all seen over the last 18 months, you make them reliant on you. Once they're reliant on you, you're able to obviously control the norms. And this is largely what the vaccine passports are about. Whether you're into the vaccine or not, the vaccine passports are a very bad gateway to China's social credit system, right? Oh, you don't have a vaccine, you can't get services, right? So we're seeing this move towards constricting people's movement, whether it's into wildlife, whether it's into property, because if you're reliant on them, they get to control the norms.
Yeah, and then you take a city like New York City, where where the last I saw, 2/3 of the 2/3 of African Americans were unvaccinated with COVID-19, and yet you have the liberal white mayor of New York City saying, well, if you don't have a vaccine, we won't serve you at lunch counters in New York City. And it's already leading to hostile interactions back and forth because there were African Americans who were denied entry into a restaurant because they didn't have the COVID vaccine, and it led to a violent back and forth there.
Right. Yeah, and we're of course seeing this all over the world, right? Many countries in Europe have instituted, obviously, mandatory vaccine passports. We've seen in Australia, we've seen in parts of Canada, of course, we've seen in New York City, we've seen in parts of California. So, yeah, it is. There is a two-tier society. Of course, now it is transcended race, and it is about, are you, if you're not on our side, if you're not pro-technocracy, you're not pro-making your nation like China, then you have to sit outside. You have to sit at the back of the bus.
Yeah.
And that's where we are now.